بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Firstly, on behalf of the Islamic Religious Council of Nepal, I want to thank you for taking Friday afternoon off to attend this roundtable discussion with a very distinguished scholar and friend of ours, Professor Dr. Sheikh Yasir Qadhi. Qadhi is right, to Bakhraj. And we're very happy to have him here with us. We want to thank him for accepting our invitation to deliver the Youth Life Discourse last night. And I was told it was a very successful event. Very happy that he's able to be with us this afternoon because there's another engagement tonight. And tomorrow he's leaving to Kuala Lumpur, straight from Singapore. We know for a fact that as Muslims in secular societies, we live in the 21st century and our challenges are unique and our challenges are different from the past, and therefore the assumption would be that our solutions will also be different. And I've just mentioned to Sheikh Yasir Qadhi, in a brief discussion in the other room, that our young are actually grappling with many issues. Right? And what we want to do is to focus on two main issues today. One is basically on our community religious life. Our community is becoming very diverse, our religious orientations are also becoming very diverse, not only from a very homogeneous Malay Muslim community, but also from others coming from overseas. And therefore, if we're not careful, there will be fault lines created, and if we don't navigate and manage it carefully, that can actually hurt the community and weaken the community further. That's the first sort of element that I want to talk about, or at least we can discuss today. The second element is really about how do we navigate ourselves in this increasingly assertive nature. In fact, the role of religion in society is also about the public sphere. It's also becoming very, very important. So in the past we don't talk about religion in the public sphere. Today we do, and of course today we also have a piece by Wali Jumla, giving his views on the LGBT today. So I think many people are going to express themselves, and I think that's positive, that's healthy. But what will be the conquest? What will be the bearing? And how do we navigate ourselves within this whole complex world? And therefore, the title of today's roundtable discussion is actually inhabiting a complex world. So now that we've inhabited a complex world, what do we do with it? And to answer that question, of course, we have Sheikh Yasir Qadhi, and I want to just quickly introduce Sheikh Qadhi is the Dean of Academic Affairs at Al-Maghrib Institute, one of the very few people who has combined traditional Islamic seminary education with the Western academic training of study of Islam. And it's a very interesting background. He graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from the University of Houston, and thereafter went off to the Islamic University of Medina, for which he graduated with a BA from the College of Hadith and Islamic Sciences, and went on to do his Masters in Islamic Theology at the College of Da'wah, and then returned to America and completed a PhD in religious studies from Yale University in England. So it's quite an interesting, sort of background, and I think we really will be enriched by his presentation. And thereafter we'll open up for questions and answers, and I want everybody to participate in this discussion. We'll give him about 20 minutes to speak as an opening, and then we can have a conversation. Over to you.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a great honor to be in your presence, and I'm very humbled that you have invited me, and I consider all of you to be my colleagues and peers. Don't think that I'm here to lecture to you. Rather, this is a dialogue and a conversation. All of you, mashallah, tabarakallah, have heard our students of Islamic knowledge, and I too am a fellow student of Islamic knowledge along with the rest of you. I just wanted to shed some light before we begin this topic on the reality of what we study, whenever we study Islam, whether it be fiqh, whether it be theology, whether it be tafsir, that we need to understand the human dimension and separate it from the divine dimension. What do I mean by this? Let me give you a simple example of aqidah or theology. And my specialty really is Islamic theology. So if you look at Islamic theology, aqidah, whenever you go and study at whatever institution, whether it's Azhar, whether it's Medina, whether it's whatnot, they will have a set theology or curriculum for you. whether it is of the Athari or the Ash'ari or the Maturidi, and these are the three main ones of our times. I don't think anybody's still studying Mu'tazili as an undergraduate level, but you will study textbooks, and you will study, this is what we believe. Now, at a basic level, this is necessary, and of course you need to study and train in one particular theology. But then, when you take a step back and you ask yourself, where did this creed come from? Who actually codified Islamic doctrines in this manner? Who actually said that in order to be a good Muslim, I need to believe in, and then you read the actual creed. We're not talking about the 6 pillars of Iman that's in the hadith of Jibreel. We're talking about Tahawi. We're talking about Ibn Taymiyyah. We're talking about Jam' al-Awam and Ilm al-Kalam. We're talking about Al-Razi. We're talking about other people. Their creeds are, of course, massive volumes. And the one thing that beginning students, maybe even intermediate students, don't realize is that there's a huge cultural, social element in the formation even of our Islamic theology. So let me give you a very simple example. We are all familiar with the science of kalam. Some of us are admirers of it, and others might be critics of it, as the Athari and the Ash'ari divide is well known. We're all familiar with the science of kalam. But both of these, those that are admirers and those that are critics, both of them fail to acknowledge, really, the foreign influence on our religion in the formation and the codification of this science. Where does this whole controversy come from? Did the Sahaba start discussing, is the Quran created or not? Is this something that the Prophet ﷺ taught the Sahaba to think about? Is this something that the Quran itself came with? Is it something the Jahili Arabs were discussing? The whole controversy of kalam and its relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then that being the stepping stone to the Sifat controversy, which took center stage in the Ummah for 700 years. The biggest controversy within the Ummah for 700 years was the Sifat controversy. Right? How do we understand the Sifat? And the baggage from that controversy, we are still living it right now. We have the various schools that have been formed. Now, take a step back and ask yourself, did the Sahaba ever talk about this? And we know they didn't talk about it. Every one of us knows that. But then where then did this controversy come from? If you go back and scratch the surface, do a little bit of research, you actually find that when the Muslims conquered Damascus, when they entered into Syria, in the 6th century CE, so 700s basically, 600 something, 7th century CE, when they conquered Syria, there were two groups of Christians having massive debates amongst themselves over the nature of logos. You know, the first word of the sentence, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's the first sentence of the Bible. They were talking about what does it mean in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What does it mean, this logos? Is logos a part of God? Is logos separate from God? Is logos a creation of God? Is logos a sifa of God? So this controversy was center stage in Damascus. When the Muslims conquered Damascus, this controversy spilled into Islam. And Muslims began, now of course in Christianity the logos is represented in Jesus Christ. And the relationship of Jesus Christ with God is of utmost importance, correct? That is really what the entire Christian controversy was over for the first 500 years of early Christianity. That's the whole differences of Christianity was over who is Jesus Christ vis-a-vis who is God. Are they two, one spirit, two spirits, one will, two wills, monophysized, diaphysized? All of this controversy. Now, one element of it was the logos and God, okay? This controversy was so pronounced that when Muslims came, they were then forced to answer the same question. But instead of logos, it became kalam, because logos is kalam. And instead of logos being a part of God, the question became, is the kalam min sifatillah or min makhluqatillah? So is the kalam created or uncreated? Right? And the entire controversy engulfed the ummah. It went all the way to the palace of the caliphate. The Khalifa and his viziers converted to a particular ideology and began persecuting the entire ummah for reasons we still don't understand. Wallahi, we still don't know. Why would you want to torture somebody because he says the Quran is makhluk or not makhluk? What is the goal? Now there's many theories, by the way, that's not the point right now to get into them, but we're still scratching our heads, what was the point? But the controversy began over what? Intra-Christian disputes. The Sahaba were blissfully unaware of this whole issue. And guess what? Their iman was not affected by not knowing of this controversy. Frankly, their iman was stronger for not knowing it. Correct? But when this controversy erupted, well then the ummah did have to think about it. And we had this huge divide between the Mu'tazila and the Jahmiyyah on the one side, and the, well at the time it's Proto-Sunnism, Sunnism is still developing, Proto-Sunnism, so Imam Ahmad and others, the traditionalists, the Ahl al-Hadith, on the other side. And the Ahl al-Hadith, the traditionalists, they said, khalas, the Quran is uncreated because it must be the... So they're trying to derive. And of course, I think everybody in this room is sympathetic to that trend, because after all, we're the intellectual descendants of that trend. No doubt we are sympathetic to that. But still, the point remains that this controversy was inherited from a foreign controversy. And it then became an Islamic one, until it engulfed the whole ummah in a flame of 700 years and divided Sunnism even into multiple strands, represented by, for example, Imam al-Ghazali on one side and Ibn Taymiyyah on the other side, right? Even within our own Sunnism, there were divides over this issue. What exactly is the kalam and the issue of the sifat? But again, the point is, where did this come from? And the same thing, by the way, of Ru'yat Allah Azza wa Jal. Ru'yat Allah. This is the classic Christian controversy. Classic, it goes back to early Christianity. The issue of Qadr. Again, we know for a fact that Qadr was introduced by Ghaylan al-Damashqi. And Ghaylan al-Damashqi, again, he got it from people that were outside of the, again, disputes between Christian groups. So, for us to not be aware of this, what happens is we then deify the human creeds and make them the basis of our religion, not realizing that those human creeds are products of intellectual discourses that sometimes weren't even Islamic in origin. By the way, some of them were. So, for example, Kharijism is a purely Islamic phenomenon, right? So it's not everything is foreign. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because in the end of the day, somebody had to think about Qadr and how do we understand Qadr. So when the Mu'tazilites come and they deny Qadr, it's kind of healthy that you're provoked. What do you guys say about Qadr? And then you have to go back to the books and think. And you have to think, and then you have to get some controversy. But let us not forget that the hadith is in Tirmidhi, that when our Prophet ﷺ was in his house, the Sahaba's voices began to rise in the masjid. Hadith is in Tirmidhi. Because one group of Sahaba was quoting verses that seems to suggest that Qadr is basically there. Others are kind of saying, no, we have free will. Because the Quran can be interpreted both ways. Hadith is explicit that Qadr is Qadr. You have to believe in Qadr. But the Quran, there are verses that لِمَنْ شَاءَ مِنْكُمْ أَنْ يَسْتَقِيمُ, for example, right? فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. There are verses like this. And then there are other things, وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Okay, وَمَا رَمَيْتَ رَمَيْتَ. You guys all know, you طلاب العلم, you know. There are verses that can be interpreted this way, verses interpreted that way. As for ahadith, they're explicit, there's really no interpretation. Okay, all of the ahadith, and that's why this was a clear divide between those who affirmed hadith, the Ahl al-Hadith, Sunnis, Ahl al-Sunnah, and those who denied hadith like the Mu'tazila. They don't believe in the hadith aslan. Because if you believe in the hadith, you have to affirm Qadr. The hadith literature is simply just full of affirmation of Qadr. But let us not forget, when the Sahaba themselves began talking in this issue and their voices raised up, our Prophet came outside and he said, what are you talking about? They said, we are debating Qadr. We're debating Qadr. And our Prophet ﷺ, according to the Hadith Tirmidhi, his face became red with anger. Abi hadha umirtum? Is this what you have been commanded to do? And I am still amongst you? To take verses from the Quran and try to fight with one another? This says this says that? For the people before you were destroyed because they did this. Now, this is really interesting because on the one hand, we have an authentic hadith of the Prophet that he refused to allow the Sahaba to delve into Qadr. On the other hand, we have our ulama that have written volumes and volumes and volumes about Qadr. Fakhruddin al-Razi has a booklet. Ibn al-Qayyim, Shifa al-Alil, one of the most impressive books ever written about Qadr. Ibn Taymiyyah's 8th volume, Majmu' al-Fatawa, is all about Qadr. Okay? Every single theological treatise has textbooks and sections of Qadr. And yet, if you really want to be Sunni and look at the Sunnah, the Prophet is saying, don't debate about it. Why did people have to debate? Because the social circumstances forced them to do that. As I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not, astaghfirullah, dismissing the entire heritage of Islamic civilization. I am saying, let us understand that heritage was a response to social and political circumstances. So as we stand here today in 2015, let us be cognizant of what the Quran and Sunnah came with and what our own ulama developed. Why? So that we are not as fanatical to our heritage as we are to the Quran and to our Prophet. We should wallahi be fanatical to the Quran. Yes, it's the book of Allah. That's the final straw. I mean, if you're not gonna believe in the Quran, really you're not a Muslim. I mean, there's got to be a line somewhere. The Quran, and the Prophet as a persona, perhaps individual hadith people can go back and forth, as a human being rahmatan lil alameen, being our qudwa, being our imam, being our Sayyid al-Mursaleen. Really, this is the non-negotiables. And I'm inshallah speaking to all of you who agree with this, right? You cannot negotiate with belief in the Quran or not. أَفَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِبَعْضِ الْكِتَابِ وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضِ. You can't pick and choose. And the same goes for our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well. فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ حَتَّى يُحَكِّمُوكَ فِي مَا شَجَرَ بَيْنَهُمْ ثُمَّ لَا يَجِدُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَرَجًا مِمَّا قَضَيْتَ وَيُسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا. You all understand Arabic. I don't need to translate for you, correct? So the point being, these are non-negotiables. But what is negotiable? It is the heritage that comes after. And this heritage, I'm not dismissing it. I'm simply saying put it into context. And do not be as fanatical to that heritage. And do not cause the disunity of that heritage that perhaps you might cause if somebody rejects the Quran. If somebody rejects the Sunnah. Rejecting the Quran and Sunnah and rejecting Ibn Taymiyyah and Ghazali are not the same thing. This is what I'm trying to come across to you. There's a huge difference between Iman and Kufr, really. Somebody who rejects Ibn Taymiyyah doesn't become a kafir. Whereas somebody who rejects Allah and His Messenger is not a Muslim. You see, there's a huge difference. So, this is, by the way, I'm a big fan of Ibn Taymiyyah. My PhD is on Ibn Taymiyyah, right? To me, he is the greatest intellectual mind that the Ummah has seen. But that's my personal opinion. I know there are those amongst you who believe that Imam al-Ghazali is the greatest mind that the Ummah has ever seen. So be it. Alhamdulillah. My love of Ibn Taymiyyah does not blind me to the fact that he's a human being who produced a synthesized theology and fiqh. And I respect that synthesis of theology and fiqh, but that doesn't supplant or replace for me the religion of Allah and His Messenger. Right? The problem comes when the followers of Ghazali, the followers of Ibn Taymiyyah, start equating their teachers to what Allah and His Messenger have revealed. The problem also comes when, and let me try to say this nicely, I don't want to offend anybody, if I haven't already. When people, okay, let me rephrase this in a different way, okay? So, for those of you that have studied in any professional seminary, you will be studying one of the well-known creeds of Islam, whether it's Ash'arism or Salafism or Maturidism, whatever it is. Now, simple question. We go over the reality of Iman and Amal min Arkan al-Iman or min Shurut al-Iman or min Lawazim al-Iman. We go over the Arkan al-Qadr and whatnot. We go over Sifat and what does Istawa ala al-Arsh mean? Is it Ta'weel of Istila ala al-Mulk al-Qad? We go over all of these things. And then we come back. We have an Azhari and a Medina graduate come back and they're now debating each other. Istawa ala al-Arsh haqiqatan. No, Istawla because astaghfirullah. Tuthbit jihad, tuthbit. We go in. Now, simple question. Before the two of them went overseas, did they have any idea of these controversies? Their own cousins and brothers and sisters, do they have any idea of these controversies? The rest of the ummah that hasn't studied in these mini bubbles and seminaries, are they even concerned with these controversies? Is the ummah debating amongst itself about istawa, istawla, haqiqa? Or have we moved on to issues that are not found in the textbooks of Medina and Azhar? LGBT, Wahdat al-Adyan, Ilhad, Do you see where I'm getting with this, right? What I'm trying to say very politely, if both camps stopped talking about these controversies, they would cease to exist in the Ummah. Think about it. If both camps simply stopped teaching their bubbles about the baggage of the last 12.5 centuries, there is enough baggage of our modernity to worry about than to have to take on baggage that has nothing to do with us. Now, some of you will say, Astaghfirullah, you're dismissing Ibn Taymiyyah and Ghazali. I say, no, I'm not. I'm trying to make you understand that was their baggage for their time and place. If you really want to follow Ghazali, if you really want to follow Ibn Taymiyyah, don't just regurgitate his books. Do what they did for our time. This is my point to you. You really are a fan of Ghazali? Great. Don't quote me his books like Google and Wikipedia and then think you're Ghazali. No. Do what he did, which is to look at the world around him, to analyze the situation, and to realize these are the priorities I need to deal with. And then he responded to them. One of the greatest things Imam al-Ghazali did, for example, was to talk about the Batini groups, the Fatimids. And in the end, you know, they assassinated the Wazir and all that, you know, in the stories of Nizam al-Mulk and whatever, and whatnot. One of the first ulama to read the books of the Ismailiyah and to refute them, because the Muslims were confused, who are these people? And he wrote an entire book that these people, they are in reality not Muslims because they believe this. That's being relevant to the people, okay? Now, you could take that book and start bashing modern Ismailis with it, but modern Ismailis are no longer controlling a caliphate in Egypt. They're less than 0.1% of the Ummah. And frankly, they are of no concern to us. They're successful businessmen, lots of money, but very little relevance to us. You could do that, but you're not going to benefit the Ummah. Ghazali needed to do it for his time. If you really want to do that, if you really want to do a Ghazali on us, look at what's happening in the Ummah, and then write a book about something that is relevant to our youth, like Imam al-Ghazali did for his time. The problem comes when you have these trends of Islam replicating, cut and paste, from their ulama, not realizing that their ulama were mujaddids. They didn't, why is Ibn Taymiyyah so great? Because he didn't copy and paste. Why is Ghazali Hujjat al-Islam? Because he did something that nobody before him did. He synthesized Ash'ari Aqidah, which is basically, this is my specialty by the way, so I have to tell you. So what Ghazali did was that he took a strand of Ash'arism, which is basically Juwayni Ash'arism, because Ash'arism was many strands. He took his Sheikh Juwayni's Ash'arism. He took a strand of Sufism, which is Junaydi's strand, and not other strands, because Junaydi's strand is a sober Sufi strand. He didn't take Hallaj or other strands. He took Junaydi Sufism, right? Juwayni Ash'arism, and Shafi'i fiqh. And he synthesized it in a way that was readable for the masses. And he wrote his Ihya Ulumuddin. Wallahi, even if I'm a fan of Ibn Taymiyyah, that is a work of genius. It requires a mind that you bring it down to the level of the masses and you synthesize these three hitherto contradictory strands. And this is a bit advanced point. I'm not trying to be polemical, but this is my area of expertise. I'm writing papers on this. Take it or leave it. But in reality, pre-Al-Ghazali, Ash'arism didn't have that much to do with Sufism. And Sufism didn't have that much to do with Ash'arism. They were different strands, right? Most early Sufis were not Ash'aris. Do the research yourself, okay? In fact, there was a little hostility. Most Sufis looked down at Ash'arism or not. Ghazali managed to bring forth, I say he caused them to wed in a manner they're never going to divorce to the day of judgment. MashaAllah. The most romantic wedding, MashaAllah. Right? He caused these two antithetical strands of Islam to come together and synthesized a version of Islam that eventually, of course, for historical reasons, Nizam al-Mulk supported it because he loved Juwayni, and Juwayni's student was Ghazali. So Nizam al-Mulk was the main, if you like, force behind all of this. And because he started the Nizamiyya, the universities, which eventually led to other universities, which eventually led to Al-Azhar. So this was a standardized curriculum. The first time in Islamic history there was a standardized curriculum was the Nizamiyya. And the Nizamiyya, that version of Islam has trickled down to basically what is now Al-Azhar, which is now traditionalist Islam. And for you who graduated from Al-Azhar, you should understand the human elements of the curriculum. You should understand where it came from, which is basically Nizam al-Mulk and Ghazali. That understanding was not. For me who graduated from Medina, I should understand Ibn Abdul Wahhab and Ibn Taymiyyah and where they came from. The historicization of these figures. And the bottom line, I think I've finished my 20 minutes. So, what was the point of my entire talk? Can anybody tell me?
Relevance.
Relevance. Exactly. One word, relevance. Rather than regurgitate controversies that go back 1,000 years, and I'm not saying they're totally irrelevant, but they're not as relevant as issues of modernity. They're not as important. And frankly, most of the time, they're nothing but divisive. I have to say, issues of the Sifat, for example, honestly, we need to stop talking about them now. Just forget about it now. We don't need to brainwash the next generation to hate another group of Muslims. It's gone. Maybe in 7th century Islam, it was the issue of the hour. Not anymore. Just move beyond it now. Okay? Is Kalamullah created? Is this any controversy anybody even is aware of? We should just move on. It's a historical thing. Let the PhD students study it in the advanced, But it's not the real issues of today. Atheism, secularism, Darwinism, humanism. These are the issues of our times, right? Our young men and women are struggling with this issue. LGBT is like, why should we care if two people love each other? Why does Sharia have to care? That's a question you need to answer. Far more important than controversies of bygone eras that are not intriguing or causing doubts in the minds of modern Muslims. So, bottom line, my dear brothers and sisters, that all of you that are tulab al-ilm, all of you that are, mashallah, involved with Islamic da'wah, Islamic movements, Islamic knowledge, understand that you have a responsibility to bring benefit to your people and societies. And the way to bring benefit is not to regurgitate controversies that have nothing to do with the people. خَيْرُ النَّاسِ أَنْفَعُهُمْ لِلنَّاسِ Hadith. خَيْرُ النَّاسِ أَنْفَعُهُمْ لِلنَّاسِ So let's make ourselves of those who, inshaAllah ta'ala, try to be the most relevant and the most beneficial to our people. Jazakumullah khair. I hope I didn't burn too many bridges or cause too much issues, but inshallah, open the floor for...
You need to burn bridges in order to build new buildings.
That's true, exactly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Qadhi. I thought it was a tour de force. It's 20 minutes, but we went straight into history and then it hits you, right? Because you were trying to figure out where is he going to bring this to, And then suddenly it goes BAM! Right? And that's the work of the genius, inshallah. Can we open the discussion? I don't want to summarize too much because we only have about an hour, and I think we have very interesting questions for Dr. Qadhi, and I'd like to invite you to make a comment or to ask a question or to expound on some of the things that he has to say. While we are there, I think it's a mixture of asatizas and officers in MUIS. Some of them are working at the mosque, some are working at the madrasas, some are working in MUIS, some are not working. But yeah, please. Anybody? Don't be shy. This is a Singaporean problem. It takes about 4 minutes or so to warm up.
MashaAllah. In one seminar I gave, when we opened up the floor, I had a prank prepared. So there was nobody saying anything, so the prank was ready. I said, can you bring the material? He brought something, turned out to be a big cube of ice. I took a hammer and I hit it and I said, I've broken the ice. I actually did it on stage, but there's no ice prepared.
Anybody? Introduce yourself.
My name is Asfa. I'm working at the office of the Mufti. Not from Al-Azhar or Medina, from Cairo University, so where do I lie? And so basically you mentioned, I agree with a lot of your points. I actually wrote a paper on Kalam and how Asatizas in Singapore's engagement with Kalam is actually antithetical to what the Sahabas actually, how they engage with it. So I totally agree what you say on Kalam. However, the values and principles that you put forth, I don't think you apply it on all of the elements across the spectrum. For example, LGBT. I've actually watched all of your commentaries on LGBT, and you commented a lot about LGBT despite your sort of lack of expertise on it. For example, very quickly say, I don't know, in one of your videos in 2012, you say that I don't know whether it is something that is natural or not natural, if you are born with or you're not born with. And the significance of that statement actually shows a lot. Actually, it shows that you do not care to even look into the matter before you make such comment. So, from what I've seen in all of your videos, you actually relegate homosexuality, and this is a modern conception of homosexuality, a 19th century conception of homosexuality, into that of a carnal desire, into that of, in your own words, urge. Whereas pre-modern Islamic scholars and pre-modern Muslims made several crucial distinctions between the attraction and the sexual desire. They have words such as ashik, they have words such as yamin ila al-jamal, they have words such as ubna, for example, and they have words such as luti, and these are all important crucial distinctions. Whereas from what I have seen and from what I have watched in your videos, you actually maintaining the same heritage or the same heteronormative Judeo-Christian paradigm of homosexuality, which is a non-sex positive paradigm or narrative. So I would like you to respond on that, because pre-modern Islamic scholars actually they move beyond the prohibition of sodomy and they talk about the attraction in itself. In fact, in the Quran, whenever God promised of Hurul Ain, there's also a promise of Wildan, Wilman. Yet no scholars, modern scholars, talk about this concept of Wildan and Wilman. What is the significance of this Wildan and Wilman? And then modern Muslims' antipathy towards homosexuals is actually antithetical to pre-modern Muslims' antipathy to homosexuals. Even Rifa'at Tahtawi, during the modern period, he was shocked when the Europeans were not as attracted to boys or beardless youth. Whereas in his country, Egypt, or for example, another Muhammad Safarini, another Islamic scholar, when he traveled to Europe, he was shocked that Algiers was so attracted to beardless boys, whereas in Europe, it was so ethical in his own words. So I would like you to respond to that. And I would like you to ask another question.
Is it the same topic or different?
Yeah, it is the same topic actually. Do you think it is un-Islamic for someone to express his love for the same sex, or i.e. as in homosexual visibility or expressions? Because during pre-modern Islam, you have expressions of love for the same sex or for beardless boys have become a literary convention. It has become a literary convention throughout millenniums actually. So I'm just saying that, for example, right now, someone say I'm going to support the rights of gays, and you quickly say that, oh, that is un-Islamic, that is unethical. And when someone say that you are gay, in the same time you are actually saying that he is also a sodomite, he is also a luti, whereas in the past he was not.
Okay, I take it you didn't attend the lecture yesterday.
No.
No? Okay, so this was the first question that was asked yesterday.
Yeah, so I would like to respond.
I gave, I think, a 10-15 minute response yesterday. How many of you attended, by the way, yesterday? So a number of you attended. I don't want to repeat all of that, okay. But it is videotape? Yesterday? Yes. It was videotape? Yes. So you can listen to that. That I think most of what you have said I respond to there. But you are correct, by the way. I'm not an expert in psychological sexual urges, and therefore I know my limits. The fact that I'm not an expert, I'm not commenting, and that was my point. And even yesterday I said that whether it's nature, whether it's nurture, the scientific community, by the way, is still debating this issue. Psychologists, psychiatrists, you'll find them on both sides, and it's not my area to get involved in which one is stronger position. But I did say, from a legal perspective, acting upon the desire and inclination to engage in homosexual acts, the legal perspective, it doesn't really matter whether it's nurture or nurture. I.e., penetrating a person of the same gender sexually will be haram, regardless of whether the urge is from nature or nurture. This was my point yesterday. I was very explicit about that. Yesterday as well, I clarified that the urge itself is not haram or sinful. I was very explicit about this. The urge itself will not be held accountable by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It could be beyond your control. It could be nature, it could be nurture, but in the end of the day, every urge that comes, every urge, whether we call it natural or unnatural, every urge that is not acted upon, Allah Azza wa Jal has overlooked it. You bring up a very interesting point, and that is, it was well known throughout Islamic civilizations that there is this genre of erotic literature, of the dangers of beardless boys, right? Of the problems of being alone in khalwa with a young man. Books of adab and fiqh even mention this, much less being alone with a woman. There's lots of adab of talib al-ilm and mufti and mustafti that talk about this sheikh should not be alone with his, young male student if he's handsome and whatnot. You're absolutely correct in pointing all of this out, but you will not find in any of those books a justification, a license to engage in what is called luti, or what is called homosexual acts. So it's one thing to understand that there are urges, and it is true, by the way, that by and large, Muslim society was aware that it is possible to be attracted to a young boy. And they, in fact, Ibn al-Qayyim's book, Ad-Da' wa-Dawa, it is alleged that it was written in response to a questioner who was infatuated with, it's all about love. And you can interpret it that a man is loving a woman, or you can interpret it that a man is loving another man, and he's saying, I'm always tempted and whatnot, what should I do? So Ibn al-Qayyim wrote his entire book, Ad-Da' wa-Dawa, over this. So it was understood, but it was never tolerated to act upon. There's a big difference. And in fact, what if I were to flip it around and say almost every single pre-Islamic and post-Islamic poetry begins with describing women? Does that mean Islam wants us to describe a woman's body? It's not the reality. That there's literature, there's genres of poetry, and then there's law and fiqh. Homosexuals existed in Islamic lands like they existed in every land. There's no denying this. Anybody who denies this is not aware of it. I mean, Abu Nuwas and other famous poets, they were well known, his poetry. Now, Abu Nuwas, you know Abu Nuwas obviously, right? Abu Nuwas and his poetry, okay, do you think any faqih justified what he's writing? Does his existence justify the legality of what he's writing about?
So what do you mean by justify?
Is it permissible in the Sharia to do what he's describing? That's what I'm saying.
To do what?
Well, he describes, you want me to be explicit, he's pretty explicit when he says.
Yeah, but that is the problem, you see. He did not say that he has ever committed sodomy. Whereas people say that he has committed sodomy. He expressed love for the other
Well, he expressed more than just love, by the way.
Yeah, but that is
Very
the point.
erotic
But that is the
poetry.
point. Just because someone expressed it in poetry back then, they didn't typically say that he is a luti. That is the point that I'm trying to make.
Who is saying, yesterday I was very explicit, and today I'll be explicit in front of you. I just said it again. The urge to have same-sex attraction. Honestly, I agree with if what you're saying is, we need to be more tolerant of people who are same-sex attraction. That's exactly what I said yesterday. But there's a red line, and that red line is committing acts of sodomy. The Sharia will never, ever, you cannot bend the Sharia to justify this. The evidences are qat'i. Qat'i al-dalala, qat'i al-thubut. The qissa of Qawm Lut, right? أَتَأْتُونَ رِجَالًا مَا سَبَقَكُمْ مِنْ أَحَدٍ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ إِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ رِجَالًا شَهْوَةً مِنْ دُونِ النِّسَاءِ, right? تَقْطَعُونَ السَّبِيلَ, right? This is very explicit. And that is why you will not find a single alim who ever interpreted the Qawm Lut to be only rape, which is a modernist progressive interpretation. Okay? In fact, the Quran does not mention rape at all. It mentions shahwatan min dun nisa. The illa is shahwatan min dun nisa. So for anybody to come and say the story of Qawm Lut does not prohibit homosexuality, honestly, with that type of, there's no point even arguing with, in my opinion, with such a person, because the story is explicit. So if you're arguing for more sympathy for people who have SSA, same-sex attraction.
No, I'm arguing for us to move beyond the red line. I mean, it's done and set in stone that sodomy is prohibited in Islam. But
so you agree that it is
Yes, I
prohibited?
agree with you, but I think we should move beyond that. We should focus on a post-prohibition narrative.
Okay.
And I would like to clear this conception actually. It's not true that only the poets were involved in this literary
and
convention.
And ulama, I agree.
Abdullah Ashraf Barawi, who was the Sheikh of Al-Azhar for 30 years, expressed love for boys.
Yes, he expressed it, but did he ever act upon it, as far as we know?
But that's the problem, you see. I mean, just because someone expressed love does not mean he committed it.
How many? But who's saying I didn't mean that?
But there is the modern conception of homosexuality. When you call someone a homosexual now, you explicitly, you're in the same time implying that he has committed sodomy, and that is the problem with us Muslims.
You have a valid point. I mean, I agree with you to a certain extent. At the same time, I would argue that such poetry could be interpreted to mean poetry between lovers as well. Most of this genre of poetry you talk about, we know that Shabrawi and others is writing for a boy because of biographical and historic information. But if you read the actual poem, generally speaking, the poetry is neutral enough that it allows for a man loving a woman. And I think there's a reason for this, that even they had enough haya to not put it in the poem, especially if they had association with fiqh. I'm not talking about Abu Nuwas, who was X-rated in pornography. Abu Nuwas, I mean, if you read him, astaghfirullah, is disgusting and vulgar. That's why Abu Nuwas has nothing to do with fiqh. But Shabrawi and others, I agree with you. You find a genre of ulama that are writing about poetry that historically we kind of think has to do with love poetry. But in my humble opinion, if you read it, you find, as I said, a sense of dignity that, I'm not going to be explicit about this. I'm grappling with this and I'm just going to write. And this is their method of expressing it. Okay.
To pick up from not the same topic, but if you're saying, okay, if you're okay with arguing about sympathy and tolerance to a particular red line, it makes a difference that until today we have the literature of Abu Nawas available for us to read. So in this tolerance today, if someone writes something like Abu Nawas today, would we then burn his book? Would we then say, no, that's haram, that's not good? Or would we allow it to reach many generations later, just like we have this ability to read Abu Nawas's books?
So again, you're conflating a number of issues here. The fact that Abu Nawas still exists to our time, do you really think the ulama of the time of Abu Nawas or later would be reading such poetry in their gatherings and encouraging their students to read it? It will exist because filth will continue to exist. Its existence is not an argument for its legitimacy. Frankly, reading...
We're not talking about its legitimacy, it's how we respond to it. Are we going to shun it or are we going to let it be? That's what
Well, I mean, I'll have to go back and research this, and I didn't research Abu Nawas's poetry, but I have no doubt, if you were to go back to his era, you will find ulama that were highly critical. I mean, that poetry is as vulgar and as explicit as is humanly possible. It's frankly erotic even for 2015, which is saying a lot. Okay?
I think you are conflating the issue to that of Abu Nawas poetry. I'm talking about the perceptions, reconstructing modern Muslims' perceptions about homosexuality, not just about erotic.
But I agree with you to a certain extent, and that is that, yes, there is an attitude amongst modern Muslims that is harsher than needs be.
Yes.
I agree with you. But I just want to be cautious here that, are we going to now think that it's time to re-understand the prohibition of sodomy in Islam? This is really, in my opinion, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to prove to me how that is even possible, given you have only one of two options. Either you say that the verses in the Quran are no longer applicable, which is the Reformation way to go, the Christian way to go. Who cares what Exodus and Genesis and Deuteronomy says, okay? And if you say that, then that's an attitude that mainstream Muslims are going to view as kufr. You understand? Or you take the other progressive route, which is to say the Qawm Lut story only applies to rapists and not to consensual sex. In which case, we will have a bit of a more academic discussion, and we'll quote you verses in a hadith and whatnot, which is very explicit, that to read in rape to the Qawm Lut story is a figment of imagination. You understand what I'm saying here?
I'm not going there, but I think I understand where you're coming from. I think we should let other people answer.
Okay.
Thank you.
But I appreciate the honesty and the
I appreciate your
and the frankness of the question. Yeah, and the frankness of the question.
Thank you so much.
Ustaz Mahmoud.
I think he raised the bar so high. He's like, everybody had this question. It was so simple and easy. And now it's
I
like,
think I can add on, it's a bit tied to this issue, but it's
Yes.
more of what is happening in Singapore.
Yes.
What part of this discussion is also to learn from our experiences as Muslims in American society. Singapore, I mean, we're living in a context where diversity is growing, and part of it is also different sexual orientations. As far as rightly pointed out, it's been with us since the beginning of history. But what is different now is that what was in the past urges or inclinations that once in the private sphere and we
are
have
now becoming
tolerated.
mainstream and
Yeah.
acceptable.
Yeah, and
Right.
that's where the contestations occur, when you want to impose certain values,
Yeah.
and then different religious groups are also getting into that contestation of values. And so how do we negotiate our values within with other different orientations? I mean, like in the US, it's a country of freedom of expressions, freedom of choice. So Muslims there basically grew up already living and facing these issues. How do you educate your children where they join schools or workplaces where these contestations are pretty much normal?
Jay, and by the way, again, getting back to your issue, the existence, and it goes back to your question as well, the existence of these types of issues does not legitimize them. A simple example from the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, the ahadith of mukhannithin and mukhannithat are mutawatir, right? The prohibition, لَعْنَ اللَّهُ مُخَنِّثِينَ مِنْ رِجَالِ مُخَنِّثَاتٍ, there's mutawatir. And yet in the hadith in Sahih Bukhari, one of the mukhannithin was visiting, one of the women, and he was describing another woman, and then the process, and when he found out about this, he said that let this man not enter upon you ever after this. Now, this is interesting here because on the one hand, we have a clear la'na upon mukhannithin and mukhannithat. And this is basically transgender, or basically, you understand. There's a clear la'na. Yet there were people in Medina that were known. So the fact that it exists doesn't mean that it should become acceptable in status quo. Allah's la'na is still going to be there. Another famous hadith of Bukhari, this is shocking when average Muslims hear this, because they think Medina was like a Jannah on earth. No, there were people there that were evil. And it is well known there were prostitutes in Medina at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Hadith is in Bukhari that the Prophet ﷺ said, if I were to do rajm to anybody without bayina, it would be fulana. And the fulana was the well known that she was the one, you understand? You understand what I'm saying, right? So, does this justify the existence? The fact that it's there, does it legitimize? This is my point. You always have people that are mukhannithin, mukhannithat. It's not an urge that is new. There have always been people that have this desire in them. But typically they were hidden, outcast, whatnot. Even the Prophet ﷺ knew they were there. But it's not, the problem now, and I said this yesterday, for the first time in human history, in the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition especially, maybe one can argue ancient Greek, but especially in the Abrahamic tradition, these inclinations are not just normalized, they are celebrated. In fact, they are made to be pious. Never before in the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition have people of this persuasion been considered to be religious role models, i.e. acting upon it, not just inclining, acting upon it. Okay? Even the Qawm Lut said, أخرجوا لوط من قريتهم إنهم أناس يتطهرون. Even Qawm Lut understood that what they're doing is something that requires tatahur, and they don't want to be made tatahur, right? what is it? أخرجوا قوم لوط أخرجوا آل لوط من قريتهم إنهم أناس يتطهرون, right? So إنهم أناس يتطهرون بمعنى أنهم عرفوا أنهم خبثاء نجس. أنهم عرفوا ذلك. مع ذلك, right? In our times, for the first time in human history, you have a priest and a rabbi and now even an imam embracing this lifestyle publicly, In America, we have multiple, I don't know about you guys, in America, we have multiple imams and imamas, mashallah, as well, that have embraced this lifestyle publicly, and they're living with their partners publicly. Aslan, this is i'tiraf. And they're performing nikahs and whatnot, and this is the first time in human history this is happening. Its existence doesn't mean it is legitimate. And your question about how we deal with these differences, so I'm not talking about Singapore because I'm not that familiar with your culture. In America, the position that I've held, which has caused me trouble from both sides, is that it is a lost battle in America. The majority of states have acknowledged it. Right now, as we speak, the Supreme Court is looking at it again, and most likely they're going to rule in favor that, because the issue has come, by the way, so 20-something states have allowed it and 14 have not or something. So a couple that got married in one of the states moved to one of the states that doesn't allow it. So they're not being allowed health benefits and whatnot. So they have taken it to the Supreme Court. Right now, as we speak, the Supreme Court is looking into it. And in all likelihood, they're going to rule in favor of this arrangement and say that it must be binding in all states. Okay, so it's a lost battle. Majority of Christians and Jews in America have now embraced this. And it is only a small minority, the ultra-Orthodox Jews and the evangelical and the Southern Baptists, that's it, and the Catholics. I mean, they have not, even Catholicism, it'll change in a while, pretty sure, but it's a minority now. So it's a lost battle in terms of courts, in terms of public opinion. So what does this mean for us as Muslims? What should we do about gay marriage being legal? I mean, my position was that in this regard, we should not jump on the bandwagon of supporting legal gay marriage, nor should we jump on the bandwagon of trying to prohibit it. Rather, our position should be, and it's a controversial one, the American government should not have any right to decide what is or is not a marriage. It's not the role of our government. Now again, I'm speaking from an American perspective. I'm not familiar with your constitution or your government. From an American perspective, morality is not in the domain of the government. But the government cannot impose on churches and synagogues and mosques its definition of marriage, because that's not the domain of the Constitution to tell us what is moral and immoral. So let the churches and synagogues and mosques preach their version of morality and marriage, and let the US Constitution and the governments and the courts decide whatever they want to do. And frankly, in America, again, and again I don't know for your country, the more freedoms any group is given, the more freedoms we are given. The more freedoms any group is given, the less the government is involved in anything, the better it is for all of us to do as we want to do. Therefore, in some ways, it is helpful for the American Muslims to ally with the LGBT community, believe it or not. And this has caused me a lot of problems in my circles to say this, right? In political issues, honestly, those people are of the most understanding of our plight and the most supportive of campaigning against Islamophobia, and the most powerful, because they had the same issues in the 80s and they overcame it, and they're very sympathetic to our plight. Why can't we take their help? But it's awkward because our community doesn't understand, and then they want moral tolerance from us, and we have to be clear and say no. And how do you explain this to them? We'll tolerate you politically but not morally. Right? It raises questions, and it's up to them, but I am not going to compromise on this position. For me, this is qat'iyat. To be brutally honest, a Muslim who understands the Quran and he still says it is halal to engage in same-sex, to me this is kufr bawah, personally. This is open kufr, just like you say khamr is halal, right? If he says riba is halal, and he knows Allah says in the Quran, أَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى, and he says riba is halal, to me there is no ta'wil over here, right? In my humble opinion, the evidences of Qawm Lut are just as qat'i. And that's why there's never been any ikhtilaf in this regard. So we have to have that red line in this regard. How do we teach our children? Honestly, this is one of the big questions of our era. And there is no alternative other than to tell them the realities of the world. And that is to say, people have lifestyles that we don't agree with. And this applies to drugs, it applies to alcohol, it applies to gambling, and yes, it also applies to living lifestyles of homosexuality or whatnot. That it's not something that we approve of. There's nothing else to do other than to be frank with them. And you will be surprised at how mature young kids are. You will be surprised. Frankly, the worrisome problem is at the age of 10 or 12, they know more than we knew, than we were at 15, 20. You know, these days the kids are, in fact, they're going to be lecturing you about things you never even heard of. Say. This is the reality. So I don't see any. I have 4 kids of my own. I'm struggling with them. My eldest is just a teenager now. I don't have an easy answer for you, but I have frank conversations with him, and there's nothing else to do other than lots of dua and hope that inshallah they grow up to understand the realities of our religion, and Allah knows best.
Yeah, Assalamualaikum. I'm Ridwan, working at movies. I have another question regarding what you mentioned about the American. And it's interesting to see how American Muslims to some extent can accept that the political reality is such that if you want more rights, you also cannot deny the rights of the others. In this case, LGBT, although morally, in our moral principle, it may be wrong. So my question is that, in Singapore, where there are calls for Muslims to ask for greater rights, for example, the lifting of the hijab ban. But at the same time, when we are pushing for one, which we see as our social rights, some of it usually paradigm of human rights argument, it's a religious right. But then we're also pushing for the government to continue banning the LGBT group from getting more freedom. I think it's a bit of, what does that show about a Muslim community? You only want thing for you, but you denying others the rights as well. And you put it simply that in America, it's quite workable, it's still controversial. So what do you think? So do you think that as a Muslim, liberal democracy is the way forward, is something that we can accept?
No, but see, here's my point. I clearly said, in my opinion, I was asked this, there were a number of states that had voting for LGBT. California, Proposition 8, famous example, last year or something. And I got calls from California, what should we do, should we vote or not? And the majority of ulama said you should vote to ban it. I was one of the few that said, no, you shouldn't. Don't try to go become their enemies, because it's actually going to harm you in the long run. But then neither, in my opinion, should you vote for it, because that is your tacit moral approval of something that is clearly against the Sharia. I said, just don't vote. Abstain. You don't have to go vote in every single bill and amendment, right?
Yeah.
So your position, or you said that, supporting their rights.
Because there are some segments of the Muslim community that feel that this liberal democracy is a Western concept. It's never, as a Muslim, you can't. You just want
but
to.
It is a Western concept, but so.
Yeah, it is a Western.
So we're speaking in English. Right?
But it's a concept that you cannot use as a Muslim. You cannot live as a Muslim.
Then why are they living here?
I don't know, because I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that.
That's what I say to the Americans. I say that, why are you guys living here then? You can't have it both ways, but.
How to make the Muslim understand that this is the reality?
You're not going to ever make the entire Muslim. There will always be large pockets, I would say the majority, who cannot distinguish between politics and morality. They cannot understand that sometimes you have to be a politician. And that's why, alhamdulillah, ulama are not supposed to be politicians. Alhamdulillah. Because politicians have to make deals, broker deals, they have to compromise, they have to lie. That's what a politician does. You get the largest consensus and then you go with it, right? Alhamdulillah, we don't want our ulama to go with the flow. We don't want our ulama to just go with, no. Our ulama have to have standards, and that's why there are many ahadith by them about ulama not entering abwab al-salatin. You should be aware of these ahadith, right? Many ahadith about ulama not going to the doors of the rulers and becoming friendly with the rulers. Because, and I'm not talking about any country, I'm just talking about the reality of the ahadith, that there are problems that are associated when this happens. So in America, from my understanding and opinion, we need to tell our larger Muslim community that whether you like it or not, you are living in a secular democracy. And in a secular democracy, there are going to be times where your vote will count, and there are going to be times where perhaps it's not wise for you to vote. And I would say, at least for us in America, most American Muslims are not understanding this. Maybe in the 80s, we had a large group that is haram to vote, it's shirk to vote. You still have this in Singapore? No, that's gone now. So in the 80s in America, we had this movement that it is shirk to vote. And if you vote, then this is like kufr to do so. In England, it's still powerful, by the way. They still have this over there. But alhamdulillah, in America, by and large, it's moved on from that. And I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, the majority of ulama of our times, in fact, I don't know of any reputable alim who holds this hardcore fanatical view. It's the reality that you have to live. I think it's pretty straightforward that this is aqall al-mafsadatayn. You either sit back and do nothing, or at least you try to have a better of the two candidates. In some issues, not in all. In some issues, I say it's better not to do. Allahu Akbar.
Thank you. Ustaz Murad?
Maybe something not to do with LGBT.
Yes,
Go on.
thank you. It's really interesting that you brought to attention the discussion of ulama not being at the abwab al-salatin, because that has been very interpreted in many ways, amongst which is the involvement of the likes of myself, of Ustaz Murad, even the Mufti himself.
Well, I didn't mean by the way.
I mean, so that's where, but in the course of your duty as a religious leader, giving advice, even such as the example of people in the other state asking you whether to vote or not, that to me would be seen as more not a religious advice totally. It is partly religious because it is
partly religious and partly political.
But it is also partly political in a sense. So I guess the other challenge is how then do we communicate. I guess you would have that challenge also, because for every decision that you make, there will be people who in that sense refute you, and some even vilify you for making those decisions. But at certain times and certain situations, ulama cannot but also provide guidance in terms of socio-religious political issues for the community. And negotiations would have to happen between even the different segments of society, including ulama for that matter. So I guess how then, in your view, especially yourself playing that role in America.
So, by the way, I was being generic here. Please don't take my generic advice and apply it to any particular situation. As I said, I'm first time coming to Singapore, and I'm not aware of your particular, peculiarities of your culture and country. So please do not say, oh, he said this about us. No, I'm saying overall, there are ahadith that are undeniable. It's in the canonical traditions. And we have in our great ulama of the past plenty on both sides. We have Abu Hanifa, who refused to the point of being beaten. And we have his student, Muhammad al-Shaybani, who was appointed as the Grand Mufti, right? Abu Yusuf. So there are plenty in the past for both camps to take solace and comfort in. And in the end of the day, I'm a pragmatist. I'm not a realist or utopic. I'm sorry, I'm a realist. I'm not a utopic, idealist. In the end of the day, you will always have ulama who feel it is better for the ummah to gravitate towards political power. And you will always have ulama who feel tawarru'an wa tuqan, that is better for them to avoid power. And insha'Allah, fi kullin khair. And the ummah benefits from having neutral people on the outside and from having sincere people on the inside. Correct? So let's be a little bit more tolerant and understand fi kullin khair. As long as, insha'Allah, there's going to be people that want khair for the ummah. Now there are always going to be people on the outside who are on the outside because they couldn't get in. And so hasad and hiqt will start to play. And let's be honest here, and again I'm being generic, please don't cut and paste it. And there are going to be people on the inside who are inside because of fame and power, and not because of khair of the ummah. So let's be realistic, that in every civilization and society, you will find ulama on the inside that are good for the ummah. And you will also find on the inside that are bad. And on the outside you will find those that are good for the ummah. And also you will find those that are bad. So inherently being close or not is not inherently going to take you to Jannah or Jahannam. But what does the ahadith generally say? And it's not just about salatin, it's about money, fame, and everything. These are tempting factors. Correct? So you expose yourself to temptation, well obviously more are going to fall when they're exposed to temptation. It's as simple as that. So again, I'm not aware of your peculiarities, but each one of you, my general advice to myself and all of you, if you really have ikhlas with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you feel your position is bringing about more benefit for the ummah, wherever you are, then stick with it. And the minute you realize that your position is compromising your deen, and you are potentially exposing yourself to a mas'uliyah that you have to answer Imam Allah Azza wa Jal, and you're not comfortable with that mas'uliyah, then change wherever you are. Because in the end of the day, you have to answer for yourself. And that's a decision each one of you has to make. So there is no one answer that fits all. It goes back to who you are. It goes back to your position of power as well. How powerful are you? And how much good can you bring about? I was in a country, I'm not going to mention names recently, I was in a Muslim country, which one of my Medina friends from Medina, he became the minister over there. The minister. And I had a frank conversation with him. It's like, I mean that because we knew each other from Medina, I could be very frank with him. I said, you're involved with this government, it's well known, it's done kada wa kada wa kada wa kada. This is a Muslim country, right? And you know, he told me something very honest. He goes, you know, I've been the minister for 4 or 5 years. These are the goods that I've done. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay? In order to do these, I have to bear with what you have just said. And I was sad. He goes, you know, you're right actually. I didn't look at it from your perspective. He's caused this, whatever he's able to do, you know. He has public lectures on TV, how to pray, how to read Quran. They never had this before. That people are being taught tafsir of Fatiha in their language. Very amazing changes on public TV. Not on some channel, Islamic, the public television station. And so many khair. So he has made a personal decision that my being the minister, I have caused more positive and have had to bite the bullet on these negatives. And in his conscience, he's doing, so that's my main concern, that in his conscience, as long as he's happy, and he realizes or he thinks, I've done more good, okay, alhamdulillah. As long as he realizes that he's got to compromise with these other issues. Everyone amongst you has these masalih and mafasid you have to weigh in your life. And you know, the higher up you go, the bigger the mafasid, but the bigger the masalih as well. So, those of you that are, wherever you are, your job is to give frank nasiha to your people who will listen to you. Those that you have a good friendship with. And make sure that their niyyah is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as long as it is for Allah, and they feel that they're doing better, then insha'Allah fi kullin khair. The problem comes when the niyyah is not for Allah. Then it doesn't matter whether you're on the inside or the outside. Then la hawla wa quwwata illa billah. You're going to cause problems in your deen and your dunya. Inshallah.
Yes, Zama.
My name is Zama I want to bring back to the point about the ability to synthesize, to be able to come up with solutions for the modern times. I think maybe you want to share a bit your own experience, the fact that you are able to went through the learning experience which is in the Western university. I know many scholars, many others who come from the religious side, just have a little lack of fear or certain suspicion whenever it comes to learning in the West and so on. So how do you reconcile with some of those learning, and how has it been of value to you in terms of dealing with the kind of issues that you are dealing with today? And how do we help many of our religious scholars today to be able to deal with those issues and synthesize both aspects, the learning from both what we can learn from the West as well as what we can learn from the Islamic tradition? How do we reconcile both and help to address the climate issues?
That's not an easy question or answer, because unfortunately we don't have enough people that have done what I have done. We need more people like this. Frankly, when I went in, I didn't know anybody even who to ask. Like, I was one of the first people that doing a PhD from an Ivy League. Now I have 10 years in Medina. Still don't know anybody who's done something like this. I mean, and I'm being honest with you, you're all tulabul ilm and have studied Islamic sciences. Wallahi, I'll be honest with you. The shubuhat that I was exposed to at Yale, some of them I still don't have answers for. The reason why many of our ulama are so scared to go into these fields is because they are not qualified to answer every single shubha. So there's an element of truth, like you don't throw your son or daughter in the water when they don't know how to swim. When my teachers at Medina found out I'm going to Yale, they expressed their concerns to me. You're going to go there, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. Many of them. And of course, I realized this is the way forward for me personally. alhamdulillah, one or two very forward-minded, very open-minded of my mentors, they appreciated this. They wanted me to go, alhamdulillah. But honestly, it was not easy because I jumped into the deep end and I did Islamic studies and early Islamic studies. And when you do that type of stuff, your brain really is scrambled completely. And you can, and the type of talk you just heard me give, I would never have given it in the Medina phase. It's not going to come because what the Western education does is it historicizes, contextualizes. It forces you to rethink. You know, Medina, Azhar, Malaysia, Islamabad will build a building for you. When you go to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, they will deconstruct the entire building, throw it all the way back down. It's going to be all blocks, back to Lego blocks. Then you have to figure out how am I going to reconstruct it myself. They're not even going to do it for you. Right? This is the reality of the Western education, that you are forced to think. And you realize that that building I inherited from Azhar or Medina is not a building that Allah revealed. It's a building that is constructed over centuries. And then and so what has happened, and I've seen this myself, many, not Medina or Azhar graduates, but many practicing Muslims have gone into these programs and come out either agnostic or preaching a version of Islam that I find very unpalatable. If you understand what I'm saying. Okay. Why is it? They didn't go in wanting to become like this. But they felt they have enough tools to be able to deal with the shubuhat, and they didn't. And even for me, I had to draw a line that I'm not going to compromise. And that line for me was the Quran. And it still is. Because the moment you begin to historicize the Quran, in my opinion, then you have nothing left. I'm being honest with you guys. If you begin to historicize the Quran, then really, why call yourself a Muslim then? If you start saying the Prophet basically go down this tangent or this, this thing of, it's not the actual revelation of Allah. And that's the gist of progressive Islam, isn't it? I mean, beginning with Farooq, not Farooq, sorry, University of Chicago, Fazl Rahman and others, right? I mean, this is really the kernel of progressive Islam, where if you do go on this route, then honestly, like I said, you have no stability left at all. And you can take the same usul that I've taken to Aqidah, you could take it to the Quran if you wanted to. But for me, this is a theological line, that I know the Quran is the wahi that Allah sent to our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And I decided that I'm not going to compromise on this belief. So because of this, overall, I'm still not going to allow, for example, sodomy. Whereas the progressives will allow it, because they're historicizing the Quran. You understand this point here, right? So it's a very difficult... Now, where did I get this line from? It's not scientific, I have to admit. It's theological. But there's got to be a theological jump of faith. الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. There's got to be some point where you say, you know what? This is... I might not understand it, right? سُبْحَانَكَ لَا عِلْمَ لَنَا إِلَّا مَا عَلَّمْتَنَا. There's got to be that point of taslim. سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا. غُفْرَانَكَ رَبَّنَا. If you don't do this, then you are not istislam. There's no Islam when there's no istislam. You get the point. Islam is all about submitting. What are you going to submit to? Well, there's got to be something. And for me, as I said, that was the Quran. So that's where I personally drew the line. And I am cautiously encouraging some of our bright young minds that have studied in the East to go to the West. I don't unconditionally encourage it, because I've been through the program. And I will tell you firsthand, if you are not fortified enough, you will come out in a manner that I think you're not going to benefit the ummah, you're probably going to harm it more than benefit it. Okay? This is my honest analysis. If you're not cognizant of the dangers of walking into being exposed to this type of ulum, because in the end of the day, not every ilm is beneficial. And that's a big difference between Islamic, if you want to be classical, a big difference between Athens and Jerusalem, philosophy and wahi. This is the fundamental difference between Athens and Jerusalem, right? Athens says, go ahead and think and think and think, and Jerusalem says, wahi has come. And this is the tension that has always existed between rationality and why. That's my PhD is on Ibn Taymiyyah's Ta'awud, right? Reconciling reason and revelation in the writings of Ibn Taymiyyah. That's what my PhD at Yale was, is about how do you reconcile this tension. I had to make up my mind. You are saying, going and studying in the West, I am telling you, as a decision you need to think about deeply. And you need to think about when you tell other tulab to do that. Not every talib is qualified. Not every talib is qualified to go into these types of issues. Sometimes, yes, ignorance is bliss. I just gave you the example of the Sahaba not knowing the Sifat controversy. It was better for them to. Who benefited, frankly? All of these minutiae and whatnot. Isn't it just better you don't even deal with all of this, right? Qadr, just make ithbat and leave it. Don't going into ta'ammuq. Wallahi, no human being can ever explain qadr. In the end of the day, there has to be just istisna. Either affirming or denying. Too many philosophical questions are raised on either side that your brain just goes around in circles. And then you end up, really better not even having gone down the whole path in the first place. So, only a few minds that you think are going to benefit from this knowledge, they should be the ones to go into it with lots of dua, because let's be honest, there's a spiritual component of our religion. You need to have that connection with Allah. Unfortunately, too much academics destroys the qalb. This is the Sufi in me speaking. Too much aqlani stuff, it destroys the qalb. It really does. And Imam al-Dhahabi says, a very famous phrase in his, I think it was Amr ibn Ubayd, the Mu'tazili guy or something, that Allah loves the ignorant worshipper more than the pseudo-intellectual philosopher. The ignorant worshipper, he didn't even think too much, he lived his life according with what he thought was Islam. In the end of the day, his salah had more khushu', he had more connection with Allah and whatnot. And this pseudo-intellectual philosopher, what did he do? Other than philosophize and split hairs and whatnot, what did he gain himself and to others? So, if you do want to go into this, as I said, make sure you have enough ilm to protect yourself, and then you have enough taqwa and wara and connection with Allah, that there's going to be certain issues that you're not going to compromise on. Otherwise, wallahi, then what's the point of going in? Science can only take you so far. And scientism is the new religion of our times. Thinking that science and intellectual knowledge is now, basically, this is the ulum. Darwinism is another example of this. Like, if you think, khalas, this is it, scientism. This is the new ism of our times. Just be careful of this. Allahu Akbar. I'm a bit concerned, but I'm going to
Assalamualaikum. I'm a YouTube student.
You're a YouTube student. Should I give you Google ijazah?
So, back to your point, how you started by saying that the Ummah should just drop this discussion.
Some of them, not all.
Yeah, and a lot of these theological discussions. And I think most of us here can agree, but we know that's not going to happen. Right? We know, that's utopian, and we know that reality-wise it's not going to happen. And partly also, it depends on who is delivering that message, right? The fact that you are delivering that message, probably a lot of traditional, by traditional they mean non-Salafi, inclined Asatizas would have rejected it immediately, even though the message was sound. But because of the deliberate, and in a country like ours where Salafism, Wahhabism is the boogeyman of the Ummah basically. Every single problem is due to Salafism. So someone like you saying that may not be, what is being said may not be palatable to many Muslims. So would it help if the same message was delivered by you with someone like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf beside you, delivering the exact same message? Basically my point is that possible, that kind of cooperation between people of clear different strengths preaching the same message?
Not only is it possible, it's being done. Zaytunan and Maghrib, myself and Hamza Yusuf and Zay Shakir, we are very close. It's being done publicly. We have public events together. And we have been through phases in the American da'wah. In the 90s, Salafism and Sufism were almost at physical war with one another. In the 90s, MSAs, you know MSAs, the Muslims, were divided. Sometimes you had 2 MSAs on the same campus. One Salafi, one Sufi. We had a major, almost civil war between Islamic activists going on. And frankly, I lived through that era. I was a college student of that era. And I was hardcore on one side. I went through my own phases. And that's why I went to Medina, that I was a hardcore, I wanted what I wanted. It was ilm and experience in life that tempered me down. The more you study, the more mature you become. And then the more you live life and live amongst the people and be a da'i, you also temper down. So, I was one of those. You still find a clip of mine 20 years ago where I'm lambasting Hamza Yusuf. Somebody found it and put it online because he wanted that old YQ. 20 years ago, literally I was 21 years old or something, you know? Overzealous, typical young kid. And one of my first public lectures ever, and these people become like shayateen to me. Wallahi, that's the reality. They become like enemies of Allah and His Messenger. Why? I'll be honest with you. Because your teachers have taught you that. I'll be totally honest with you. Because that's what your teachers have taught you. Sufis say, oh, those Wahhabis, those... You literally make shayateen out of them. Right? And then Salafis say, oh, those Sufis. You make shayateen out of them. Then when you mix with them, you realize, my God, they say Bismillah before they eat. They can't be shaitan. They actually recite Fatiha. You know, you humanize them. Right? But your teachers demonize them. And wallahi, it's a two-way street, I'll be honest. It's not just Salafis doing, it's Sufis do it just as bad. Both sides demonize the other. But both sides don't intermingle with the other. And both sides are living in their bubbles in the Middle East. Huh? When you come to America, Singapore, others, you realize you're a minority within the majority. Now within the minority, you're going to split hairs over issues like this. Isn't it backward and stupid? Isn't it something that is of no benefit? Wallahi, the people who are doing this, they're the shayateens. Both of them. The ones who are dividing the ummah like this. You get my point here? So, not only is this happening in America, alhamdulillah, I can tell you from my own personal experience, this issue has now almost been wiped off the map in America. You hardly find Salafi-Sufi debates anymore. Because the both of us, we sat down, 2007, we literally had a meeting together. Salafis and Sufis. Both of us are post-Salafi, post-Sufi, post-modernist, post-structuralist. We're trying to, like, you know, having read Derrida and others, we're now, so we're both now like understanding like we can't continue down this line. And we publicly released a statement. It's called the Pact of Mutual Respect and Cooperation. Google it. And you will find this 2007.
How did that meeting come about? If an advice
Myself and Zayd Shakir engineered it. Because you need to have two people from both sides who want to do something. Okay? And we literally sat down and we agreed to a protocol. And we agreed to a number of things. And of them was, we're not going to arouse the masses against the other. Sure, to this day, if I take a bunch of advanced students into a room and teach them Aqidah, you know, you're going to have to talk about Ibn Taymiyyah and Ghazali. Because in the end of the day, for those advanced students, it's the heritage you need to know. If you don't know it, it's like a chemistry guy not knowing what, you know, early chemistry. You need to know it, you know. Even if you move beyond it, you have to go through it to get there. So sure, to this day, I will take those advanced students and go over Ibn Taymiyyah's Tadmuriyya, Wasatiyya, Hamawiyya, talk about Ibn Abdul Wahab, say this is the other side. But I don't need to bring that to the minbar and the khutbah. I don't need to bring that to YouTube like I did 20 years ago. You see the difference? Now you listen to me now on YouTube, I always trivialize these differences like I did in front of you as well. Because that's what I feel. So there's a protocol that we both agreed to. And we agreed, it doesn't mean that we're going to change our aqeedas. In the end of the day, I'm still sympathetic to Ibn Taymiyyah's ithbat of sifat. But I realize it's not that big of a deal. This is the difference. It's not as if I'm now an Ash'ari. No, I still am sympathetic to Ibn Taymiyyah's creed. I still am. But I don't view Ash'ari as being evil. It's a human attempt to defend the Sunnah. And I give them credit for doing a lot of good. This is the difference that has happened. You know, that you just humanize and you say Ibn Taymiyyah is a human, Ghazali is a human. They both attempt to define the criterion or the issues of their time, and they both have their methods. I might personally sympathize with one more than the other, but the other method is not invalid or evil or filthy or whatnot. So the same goes as well, that if you have tensions between these two movements, I don't know, if you do, get the more open-minded amongst you to come together and agree to a protocol. And yesterday's talk, did you attend yesterday's talk that I gave? Yesterday I gave it up.
But I had live updates.
You what?
I had live updates.
You had live updates, okay, mashallah. I didn't know somebody was live tweeting. So I said, like the Mawlid issue, for example, it should not be an issue anymore. It's a non-issue. The issue is to make it an issue. That is really the issue. It's not something, I mean, subhanAllah, it's not as those people are going to nightclubs or drinking or whatnot. They're coming together to praise Allah and His Messenger. And you're going to have a big deal about that? I mean, I still don't celebrate the Mawlid. But wallahi, I have nothing but genuine respect. Genuine respect. That's a big difference than the old me. That I literally thought this person is doing something that's leading him to Jannah. I haven't changed my position, which is that it is safer not to do it. And the process in doing the Sahaba didn't do it, you open up a door. I still am sympathetic to that. But I understand that there's the niyyah of the people that do it. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّةِ. And the niyyah is what? To show love to Allah and His Messenger. And Allah will not punish somebody for showing love to the Messenger. Even if the way they did it was something I think is not as academic. You see my point? So why should I give up? And that's why you won't find me giving a khutbah or going ranting and raving anymore. Maybe I would have 20 years ago, but not anymore. So you as well in this country, for sure, even though I don't know Singapore, I'll tell you for sure, you guys don't need to be discussing sifat and mawlid on the khutbahs. 8 and 20 rak'ah. That's not something the masses need to be debating amongst themselves. You have our youth becoming agnostic and atheist. You have our youth doubting Allah and His Messenger. And you're going to bring up issues of mawlid and group dhikr? Then honestly, you haven't understood the problems of the current ummah. And you're simply taking the baggage of your ancestors, your heritage, and then shoving it down the throats of people who don't need that food, and that food is going to be harmful to them. You see what I'm saying here? Allah knows best. In the case, final question, guys, because I need to make another move somewhere else. So
Is there a final question?
Speak now or forever.
I have a question. The statement that when you were talking about the synthesis and your journey and studying and who can do it and who can't, and so you mentioned that one particular sentence that you said, even after all this time, there are still so many shubuhat that you have no answers to. Now, if 10 years in Medina and I don't know how many years in Yale, still
8 years, unfortunately. I took too long for my PhD.
So if after, is that 20 years? It's a very long time. If after such a long time, someone of your caliber still has no answers for so many shubuhat, then this is the question of today. How are we going to be relevant today? Because these shubuhats are the ones that are becoming public questions. These are the ones that we have to confront. People are waiting for answers. And if we are unable to, then...
So, the answers to those shubuhat are not necessarily aqli. Here is, I think, the big issue of our times. We assume every single answer has to be aqli or rational. In the end of the day, there are answers that are fitri. And science does not recognize the fitra. Simple example, which kind of gets to the heart of Ash'arism and Atherism, existence of God. One of my entire chapters of the PhD was Ibn Taymiyyah's proofs of the existence of God versus the Ash'ari proofs of the existence of God. The existence of God, and this is my opinion, and I know there's some disagreements here amongst other schools of Islamic law, Islamic thought, is something that is primarily fitri and not aqli, as much aqli. And the reality that we have in our times demonstrates this. You have the most intelligent people in the world, by and large, denying God's existence. Most scientists in the world are agnostic and atheist. Because it's not purely aqli. There's an element, in fact, the predominant element, It's something that is fitri. Afillahi shak. That's really what it boils down to. I mean, how can you deny Allah? It's something Allah Azza wa Jal put it in us, right? وَإِذَا خَذَ رَبُّكُمْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ قَالُوا بَلَى شَهِدْنَا. This is the mithaq. It's ingrained in us. I can't prove it to you that it happened, but it's there. So I cannot answer every shubha from an aqli perspective, because not every shubha has an aqli response. There has to be a time when you, as I said, you just say, Sami'na wa ta'na. I mean, honestly, the existence of evil, for example, theodicy, the fancy term, humanity has been grappling with it from the beginning of time, from the pre-Socratic philosophers. Every theologian since the beginning of time that believes in God has attempted to reconcile why is there evil? Why did that young child die of starvation? Why did this? I mean, why would a God do this? And no matter what evidences you give, no matter what aqli things you say, for every if there's a what if, for every and there's a but, for every why there's always a never-ending loop. In the end of the day, you just have to accept this is a world that has some evil in it, and it's for a wisdom Allah knows. That's not an aqli answer, is it? It really is iman bil ghaib, because you cannot give a fully rational answer for the existence of evil. Because if Allah had willed, He could have made a Jannah on earth. If Allah had willed, this could be a Jannah. But Allah willed this is not a Jannah, and He tests us for Jannah. Why does He test us? Why? For every, and that's why even in the hadith, what did the Prophet say? Shaitan will come to you, and he keep on asking you this, until he will even ask you who created Allah. Then when you get to that point, what should you say? Amantu billah, and close the door. Right? Is that an aqli response? No. It's, you just stop. That's a fitri response. So it wasn't meant to terrify you that not every response exists. It was merely meant to indicate not every response has a rational answer to it. Not every question, excuse me, has a rational or scientific answer to it. That's really what I meant. And there has to be a time where you just agree that you're not going to go anywhere by thinking more deeply about this issue. That's what I meant when I said that it doesn't have an answer. Does that answer your question though?
It does, but at the end of it still does not. I mean, these are questions that maybe we don't need to delve into, the sifat of the existence of God, but it still does not answer practical, everyday challenges of the ummah. Like I don't want to go back to the LGBT issue, but like the LGBT issue, I can't think of any other at this point in time.
So why would Allah create somebody with those tendencies when it's not halal for them? That's exactly the evil. Goes back to theodicy. It's exactly the same issue of theodicy. Why would Allah do this? Why would Allah do that?
But however,
and there is no easy response, is what I'm trying to say.
Right. Last month, for instance, we had a conversation similar to this with a rabbi, and he discussed how their congregation or their theology dealt with this, for instance. So he gave an alternative response. While he said, we politically agree with them, we morally don't agree with them, definitely.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But they went a step further. That step further that they went to was, they said, we can't stop the rights from getting married. If they want to get married to same-sex people, that's fine. Go ahead. We can only talk to them on the moral level as a Jewish person. That does not stop you from being a Jew. I can talk to you about your relationship with your Lord, which is completely private, even if you're sleeping on the same bed with someone on the,
But
you know what
I would say the same thing. What that person said is exactly what I would say.
Yeah, but that would require that we delve into, these are shubuhat, and that would require a lot of rational understanding of why we would say something like this. So there are shubuhat, and there must be some kind of rationalization and reaching to some kind of...
To a point.
I'm not this, yeah, to a point, but we have to deal with shubuhat, even no matter how difficult it might be.
Agreed. But all I can say is, again, you brought up the issue again of LGBT, you cannot have unless you can tell me one, I don't know of a solid intellectual response to the simple question, why would God do that? There is no answer. It's the same issue. Why would God cause tsunamis? Why would God? There are things that لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون. In the end of the day, لا يسأل عما يفعل. We don't have the right to question God. So that will lead some people to question his existence. Because if they don't understand the God they're going to believe in, they end up rejecting the God. Whereas for me, I think it is far more logical to believe in a God, and I don't understand certain things, than to reject a God, and then I have a whole million other questions that are unanswered. So there is no answer for your question other than to say it only works to a certain amount of time, and also for a certain group of people. Atheism, for example, cannot be solved intellectually. The person, in the end, his fitrah has got to want to believe. See, I have a position, again, it's my personal opinion. Atheism is not an intellectual problem, it is a spiritual problem. This is my opinion. And atheism cannot be argued rationally. You just deal with it a few minutes and then that's it, leave. Because the Quran itself does not cater to atheists. There's only 1 or 2 verses that cater to atheists. There's at least 500 that cater to pagans. The Quran gives paganism more intellectual credit. Worshipping an idol that you carve with your stone. At least 500 verses catering to pagans, mushrikun. And with great difficulty, you'll find 1 or 2 verses that cater to atheists. Afillahi shak is one of them. And then the other one is Am khuliqu min ghayri shay'in am humul khaliqun. These are basically the only 2 verses that are pretty much explicit about atheism. That's it. And that's all you have in your arsenal in the Quran. Because atheism cannot be responded to fully intellectually. Like Ibn Taymiyyah says, and this is a big difference between the Athari and the Ash'ari creed, because Ash'arism and Maturidism, Mu'tazilism, it's based on the premise you can prove God intellectually. Whereas Atharism is basically, as Ibn Taymiyyah says, the famous quote, how do you expect me to go find proofs for Allah's evidence for Allah's existence when everything around me is screaming His existence? There's no point in complicated proofs. Complicated proofs never won one person in the history of mankind. All from the cosmological to the teleological to the... Nobody ever converted to the moral, to Pascal's wager. None of these proofs actually ever worked in real life. Do you see my point here? People refuse to believe because it's not an intellectual problem. It's a spiritual problem. So I think, and the problem LGBT, the problem is directly linked to this issue. If you cannot understand the wisdom of Allah, are you still going to believe in Allah or not? That's the question. And that is Iman bil Ghayb. I know my time is up.
Thank you very much. Please allow me to offer an intellectual and accurate response to invite everybody to thank you for once again, thank you very much, Dr. Qadhi. I think everybody has benefited substantially from the discussion. I have enjoyed so much. I wish we could carry on, but we have to accept the fact that Dr. Qadhi has another engagement tonight. For those of you who have heard enough of him, there's his YouTube. But there are certain years that you have
certain years are bad.
You put it into some freezer. Okay.
You can look at my beard. If it's really big and long, move on to the next step.
Well, thank you very much, There's a token of appreciation. What is it, Shirley? Okay. Do you have space in your bags?
I don't know, shall make space. Exactly.
Oh, right. We give books here. So, let me just. This is the Mui story. This is the organization, and we published this when we celebrated the 40th anniversary. So it's a whole write-up about how we evolved.
Excellent. I'll definitely benefit from this book.
This is a biography of our former Mufti. He was the longest-serving Mufti. Second Mufti, but he was the longest-serving. He still is our advisor now.
Okay.
But we asked him to write a biography because his story is also a Mui story, the story of the community, how we eventually evolved from a community of religious. And of course, there are many other populations. Keeps you busy on the plane.
Inshallah. Pleasure was mine, inshallah, and I hope this isn't the last time I come to Mui, inshallah.